Okay, is everyone else set? Okay, all set. Okay, good evening, everyone. Tonight we have, we're going to call to order the Narragansett Town Council work session. Today's work session is to interview applicants for the planning board. Today is December 4th, 2023, and time is 6 p.m. So there is one seat available for appointment on the planning board. Terrence Fleming has served the maximum number of terms. And according to section I.4 of the approved rules for commission, committee, and board appointments, all new vacancies for the planning board require that the town council interview candidates. The selected candidates to interview this evening are Brian Wagner, Thomas Callahan, and Thomas Hines. So we'll go in the order that these are presented here. So the first up will be Brian Wagner, who is currently serving on the Conservation Commission and Land Conservancy Trust as Conservation Commission representative. So the way we normally do this is we'll give you an opportunity to tell us a little bit about yourself, give us some background, and then we'll go to the council for any council questions or comments.
Okay.
So, thank you. Welcome.
I provided a copy of my resume along with my application materials, but just to sort of gloss over it, I was admitted to practice law in Rhode Island in 1989, 88. Clerked for a state Supreme Court judge, spent some time in a medium-sized firm, spent 15 years working as legal counsel to DEM, even serving as chief legal counsel for a period of time during replacement of that position. After my time at DEM, I spent 10 years as a solo practitioner on my own, at which point I decided that I really needed a career change and went into municipal planning. I worked for 3 years in the town of Coventry before moving over and taking my current job in South Kingstown as senior planner. I've been involved with the Conservation Commission and Land Trust in Narragansett for many years. I don't even remember when I started at this point. And I realize that along with a lot of other commission members that my time on the Conservation Commission will be timing out shortly, and I'm looking for other opportunities to serve the community. I think the planning board is an incredibly important body. I think it has an important responsibility to weigh preservation of all of the things that people love about the community, along with legitimate interest that people have in being able to do things with their property, and to meet the needs of the community in terms of providing tax revenue, support for businesses, affordable housing, and a lot of other important issues. So I'd be honored to be able to work on those issues for the town. If the council has any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Thank you, and I appreciate that. We have your resume and CV is very impressive, but we do like for the members of the public to hear a little bit of your background, so thank you for giving that detailed description. Appreciate it. So now we'll go to the council. Does the council have any questions? I'll start with Councilor Kopech.
Hi, Brian. How are you?
Good. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you. Can you just explain why you're particularly interested in the planning board? Because the reason I will ask that question because I think it is probably the most difficult, position that we have as a volunteer in the town, and I also think it is the most complicated. So it amazes me that people want to be on the board, to be honest with you. So can you explain why? Why you're interested?
I think it draws from a lot of my background. It is, in my mind, sort of a quasi-judicial role in that you are taking law and applying it to facts. Each application that comes before the board is unique in some way, shape, or form, and you have to be able to address the concerns related to that specific application. in terms of work, I think that I will be able to perform the review. Certainly as somebody who works with boards and commissions all the time, I often find myself dealing with board members who do not put as much effort into preparation as I would like, and I would certainly not want to put myself in that category as well. So I wouldn't be applying for the position if I didn't feel like I could put the time and preparation into the job.
Okay.
Certainly, it will require me to step down from my roles on the Conservation Commission and the Land Trust, not just because of any local requirements that I do so, but because I couldn't serve on 3 boards here and have the time to put into planning board that I would need to.
Okay. I just have one more question. Clearly, there are a significant number of changes and, issues that are coming our way because of the law changes through the General Assembly, and also, from what I understand, that's not something that's going to stop anytime soon. So what do you think of, of your ability to be prepared for this kind of, these things that we don't actually entirely know what's going to come our way?
The only way you can prepare for them is to try and stay in the loop and educate yourself as to what is being considered and what is coming down the line, and to work with staff to try and make sure feedback is getting to the legislative representatives as to where state-initiated legislation is appropriate or not appropriate, or is hitting the mark or is not hitting the mark. At the end of the day, if something comes down from Providence in the form of state law, you have to respond to it and have to find a way to make it work in your community. And
Right.
Fortunately, we have great staff here in the Community Development Department and legal counsel and whatnot to help us do that.
Okay. And just, I'm sorry, just one more little thing. Have you had experience working with members of the General Assembly in the various and sundry things that you've done in the past?
I spent a lot of time while I was at DEM working on legislation with legislators, with the legislative liaisons up at the State House. Of course, that was quite a while ago. Most of those personalities have come and gone at this point, but I'm certainly well acquainted with the process of submitting draft legislation, of getting it through the committee process, and of working with Ledge Council, behind the scenes to try and get the things done you need to get done.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to go over to the right. I'm going to ask Councilor Ferrandi if he has any questions or.
Thank you, Mr. Wagner. I have a kind of a two-pronged question and one question after that. First of all, the town of Narragansett, probably you being so close in South Kingston, you might remember that we have enacted a bulk zoning ordinance to stop some of the massing of homes on small lots. So are you familiar with that, number one? And I'll go through my questions. And I don't know if you followed it, but would you consider that a relevant ordinance in kind of controlling some of the overpopulated and over-density houses on these smaller lots? And one more after that.
I'll have to admit I am not familiar with your specific ordinance. I am familiar with the concept, and certainly looking at building bulk of scale and massing on land is one thing that you can do to try and make sure new development is appropriate to the community. And that's certainly something, I'm willing to work with. I'm sorry if you were looking for more, but not being familiar with the specific ordinance, it's difficult for me to go forward further.
Yeah, it's been Okay, and seeing it's the town right next door, would you see any conflict of interest in, on the planning board in Narragansett and the planning planning chairman in South Kingston as far as, what they're working on, what Narragansett is working on? Would you look at it as like a collaboration thing, or would you be able to, draw the specific lines where needed?
I would not see a conflict. You're two separate towns with two separate mandates. I do think the idea of collaboration on issues, similar issues that confront the town is an interesting concept. Through my work with the Conservation Commission here, we've reached out to the Conservation Commission in South Kingstown in the past on certain issues, plastic bags, the nip bottles of alcohol, to have discussions about those things. And in fact, on Wednesday night, we'll be having a collaborative meeting between our affordable housing commissions to talk about related issues. We are similar communities confronting similar housing problems, and to the extent that we can share information and come up with solutions, I think that's great. We are communities that are attached at the hip. We share common economic development, common economic centers, and we constantly have business flowing back and forth across the town boundaries. So communication and collaboration, I think, is a good thing.
Okay, that's all I had. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Lawler?
Hi, Brian. Thank you for your service, and thank you for continuing to serve. And I have to echo Deb's comments, the planning board especially. Surprised that so many people want to serve on it, but I appreciate that very much. You've answered so many of my questions between the other two counselors, but one thing you said actually jogged a question I have here. You planners they plan the future. So what do you envision 10 years from now? What do you think being on the planning board, how do you think you being on the planning board, you would help change the future of Narragansett? What would that look like?
I think there's a lot of coming issues that the town is going to have to address. Housing is an incredibly important issue right now, not just in Narragansett or South Kingstown, but across the state. Just this summer, I had to address the fact that my son, shopping for his own house, had to move to Connecticut to find something that he could afford. Thank God he's only 45 minutes away, but nevertheless, he couldn't buy what he bought across the state line anywhere near here. So we need to address that. I think we have a responsibility to educate the community about what affordable housing is. It is not 1950s era project development. This is workforce housing for your teachers, your police officers, your firefighters, and lots of other people who need to be in town, who have historically been thought of as our core community members, but who can no longer afford to live in the town that they work in and service. In addition to that, I think that the issues related to climate change and sea level rise as a coastal community are going to become increasingly important. And we need to have those discussions before they become imperatives, because they are going to be very time consuming to deal with in an appropriate manner, and we need to get out ahead of that. Furthermore, in a community like in Narragansett, I think we also need to focus on commercial development. Commercial development is the backbone of your tax base. Coming from Coventry, where they place the bulk of their tax base on their residential users, and residential property taxes were sky high, really impressed on me the importance of maintaining a vital and viable commercial base. So from a planning perspective, we always need to keep an eye on that as well.
Thank you.
Counselor Cecilia Bonanno?
Hi, Brian. A lot of great responses from you already, but I had a question about the affordable housing. You know, in Narragansett, we have the Affordable Housing Trust Collaborative. And as a senior planner and as a new member to the planning board, can you share what your expertise is around affordable housing and how you could see it move further on our goal to affordable housing in the town of Narragansett? Any creative ideas, any quick moving the needle? I mean, it's been an issue we've been working on, as you know, for a long time.
Yeah. It's a very complicated question. The tools that the state has given us to try and deal with it through comprehensive permitting are not adequate to deal with the problem. It's barely enough to keep you at the percentage that you're at. It's never going to allow you to advance toward that 10% on its own. So we need to try and become more creative with creating affordable housing. And when I refer to affordable housing, I mean both capital A affordable housing, the deed restricted housing under the state comprehensive permit, but also little a affordable housing, meaning housing that is affordable simply by virtue of its nature or its size, and whether that's creating mechanisms to jumpstart the now non-existent business of starter housing, which nobody seems to be building anymore, accessory dwelling units, and missing middle housing, duplexes, triplexes, all the way up to 6 or 8 units without getting into giant apartment buildings. I think all of that needs to be explored if we're going to create different options for people around town.
Thanks. I just have a couple more. So tonight at the council meeting, there's going to be a public hearing based, on talking about the zoning changes. And one of the things in the proposal is striking out inclusionary zoning, sort of crossed out. And I just was wondering what your perspective on inclusionary housing and what you think about it.
I think it's unfortunate that the legislative changes this year have done what they did to inclusionary zoning. I know there are a lot of communities around the state, having just gone to a planners meeting last week, that are doing the same thing because they just don't see inclusionary zoning as being attractive to developers anymore. It won't create an attractive alternative. South Kingstown, we decided to leave it on the books, but realistically, we don't expect to see anybody taking advantage of it. And in those instances where you would propose a development that would trigger the inclusionary zoning threshold, we anticipate to see everybody jump to state comprehensive permits because it's set at the same percentage and you get to sidestep all the local zoning restrictions as well. So it's a shame that they did what they did. I think I wouldn't be surprised to see some buyer's remorse maybe with the legislature this session when they realize they did what they did and see communities just doing what you're doing and putting a red line through it.
Okay, my last question. Could you share with us any recent decisions from the planning board and whether you agreed or disagreed with any of them? Have you followed that?
No, I can't say that I can do that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I'll just have a couple questions. So think about that inclusionary zoning. We'll be discussing that, I'm sure, at the meeting today. And, we are at Narragansett, we've never used the inclusionary zoning. So anyway, and then thank you for, I agree with you about, I think we do need more education to the public about affordable housing because I think there is that common misconception of what affordable housing is. So I think that is definitely an important aspect of it. So I just have this one question I like asking people. Tell us about an experience you have had collaborating with a group, particularly where opinions conflicted or the decision was controversial?
I'd kind of like to draw from something that's not involved in my current job.
That's absolutely fine.
Just because I don't want to go there, but I would have to say something I could draw on based on an earlier question, working on legislative changes was an experience I had while working at DEM, coming up with new legislation for the cleanup of brownfield properties. And I had spent a long time working on getting my language right, making sure I had dotted all my I's and crossed all my T's, only to go into meeting with legislative counsel and objectors to the legislation who proceeded to take all the I's, the dots off the I's and then the crosses off the T's because it was too good and they wanted to create avenues for people to litigate it after it was passed. And having to sit through that experience to negotiate backwards on my own work product to make it worse, but still get something on the books that was productive and got to the ends that we needed to get to, which was to make sure that these sites were cleaned up and put back into productive use, was an experience. So we did eventually get the legislation through. It wasn't what I wanted, but it's what we needed to happen. So compromise is the name of the game.
It is. Thank you. Great answer. Okay, any other follow-up questions, or is everyone good? Well, thank you for your time, and thank you for
Thank you very much.
answering all those questions. Okay, so next up, we'll have Thomas Callahan come up to the podium. Mr. Callahan is currently serving on the Zoning and Platting Board of Review. And he has experience interviewing with us, so you know the drill.
Good evening. Thank you for inviting me back. My name is Tom Callahan. I live at 26 Baltimore Avenue here in Narragansett. I own the home that we're in now since 2011. I live there with my wife, Linda, who's a retired librarian. Background, born and raised in, at least for the first 10 years of my life, in Providence. We moved to Warwick, just outside of Apponaug, when I turned 10 years old. Went to the University of Rhode Island, graduated from there in 1974. Finished a master's degree at American University in Washington in 1976. While in Washington, I had a very junior staff position working for the Senate Democrats on the Senate floor for 2.5 years. Left Washington, went to St. Louis, Missouri, spent 8.5, 9 years out there. First as a Coro Fellow, 9-month graduate level fellowship in public affairs, then as a lobbyist and a political operative for the AFL-CIO, the Central Labor Council in St. Louis. And then I went back to the Coro Foundation. I was their director of training and executive director for 6 years. And we decided to move back home closer to family. Both of our families resided in Rhode Island. Left St. Louis, moved to northeastern Connecticut because it was what we could afford at that point in time. So we were halfway between Rhode Island and halfway between where I worked at Aetna Life and Casualty. While at Aetna, I was a senior member of the philanthropic and social investment staff there, worked there for about, again, another 8.5 years, doing the philanthropy program for Aetna in the greater Hartford area and nationally for their social investment program, doing affordable housing, community development in communities across the country that Aetna had locations. Left Aetna in 1995 to go to the University of Connecticut. UConn at that point in time had just been the beneficiary of a major state initiative called Yukon 2000 to invest $1 billion in Yukon's infrastructure over a 10-year period of time. I went out initially to be the associate vice president for institutional advancement. Went on to be a special assistant to the president, associate vice president for administration and operations, vice president for bioscience Connecticut, and then back as associate vice president for infrastructure improvement at the main campus and stores. Retired from Yukon in 2016, came over to Rhode Island in 2016 into 2017, worked as first deputy director of commerce with Stephen Pryor for 6 months, and then over with the Executive Office of Health and Human Services to work on the fixing the UHIP project that had gone astray. Retired again in 2017, and have been here ever since. Spent 2 years on the planning board. I've served on a nonprofit board called the Norcross Wildlife Foundation. It's located in Connecticut, Massachusetts. Has about 5,000 acres of conserved open space under its wings. I have finished a URI Master Gardener certificate here. And I guess the thing that has caused me to come most frequently to this chamber I've been tracking very carefully a development up on Clark Road for a number of years. So I think that's it in terms of career.
Thank you. Okay, so we'll go, Sam White will ask Councilor Kopek if she has any questions, and then we'll go to the other council members.
I definitely know Tom's story pretty well now.
I'm sorry if I had to say
It's okay, it's
sorry if I
fine.
had to say it so often.
It's just because, of our meeting with the affordable housing
Right.
person the other day.
Right.
I guess I am familiar with your background, and I know one of the questions that I have has to do with the fact that you're on the zoning board now. What's your rationale for applying for this position? Because you're on the zoning board. I don't know whether you would plan to leave that position or what you would do if you were selected here, but you just got the full-time shot on the zoning board, and I think there's so much work that needs to be done given what's going on in Providence, and so I just wanted to know what your rationale for all this is.
Well, I like hard. And you and others have described that position on the planning board as hard,
Right.
and I like hard.
There you go.
I've made a career of doing hard, but more clearly, and this was a question that Councilwoman Cicilline Bonanno asked at one point in time about a year ago. I see the planning board as having a broader policy role than the zoning board. The zoning board has a more narrow charge. It calls balls and strikes on applications that come before it. The planning board does that, although it does it in the form of a recommendation. It also has a responsibility for overseeing the development of the comprehensive plan, and it also serves as the board to which you direct many of your initiatives that come your way for advice from the planning board, whether it be on affordable housing or any one of a number of things. My background is pretty diverse. I have had a very versatile career with a lot of different perspectives that I can bring to bear on this stuff. And it just seems to be better suited. From my vantage point, it's more interesting. I'm better suited for it, I believe.
Okay. And I'm just going to ask that question that I asked Brian before. With the changes to housing laws that have already happened at the General Assembly and the assumption that there's going to be more coming out next year, how familiar are you with the changes, and also what are your thoughts about them?
I've spent a fair amount of time with them over the course of the last 2 or 3 months. I have both tried to go through them myself, and I've done that a couple of different times. I have been to the presentation that was made here a couple of weeks ago. I get a presentation at the zoning commission, at the zoning board meeting myself. So I've seen all of this, the kind of the PowerPoint presentations that have been made so far on this. I think, as you know, I became quite concerned over the course of the summertime, having read one specific piece of legislation that was passed that had to do with how substandard lots of record were going to be treated going forward, which I think is a concern for the neighborhood in which I currently reside, and it should be a concern for other neighborhoods who find themselves in the same condition. I am familiar with both the language on both on inclusionary and on the comprehensive development and the comprehensive development plans. I've seen the work that the planning board has done with respect to developing specific standards for each one of the proposed uses out there, which is a tremendous amount of work that is going to have to be done. The elimination of the standards in terms of not for financial gain, not the elimination of the comprehensive plan as being a standard that has to be met, provides less latitude in terms of kind of people at the planning board looking at those things. So I think there's a lot of work that has been done. There's a lot of work that will be done in the first steps that are taken by the planning board and the zoning board over the course of the next year will be pretty important to the future in Narragansett.
Okay. And just finally, clearly you've had some experience working with the state government. Can you just explain how you think that might be valuable to the position that you would have on the planning board?
I try not to be flip here. You've all worked with the General Assembly in some way, shape, or form at some point in time. Clearly, it's important to have your local delegation in line, number one. We were fortunate in Mansfield at a point in time when we were trying to get some big things done where we had both the Senate President and the House Majority Leader representing Mansfield. And so our ability to move stuff along in the General Assembly was quite different than it had been at other points in times. You got to be credible. You got to have a good argument. You got to anticipate the arguments that are coming your way. You got to build coalitions, both outside of the General Assembly as well as inside the General Assembly itself. You got to be persistent. You got to understand that most times, most things don't get done in 1 year. It takes multiple sessions, multiple times to go back and forth in terms of getting what you want done. And then you got to be willing when you make a mistake, and you will make a mistake, to fess up to it and clean it up and make it right.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you. Councilor Ferrandi.
Oh, thank you. Hi, Mr. Callahan.
Good evening.
I'm gonna go with the question on the bulk zoning again. Are you familiar with it? And it's been in effect a couple of years, I guess, so you may have seen it also on the zoning board. So how do you think it's working as far as effectiveness on some of the massing on the large houses on the small lots?
I think it's worked well so far. Councilman Ferrandi. I think, like anything new, it's the developer community has time to digest it, and the individuals who come forward with applications that are not necessarily represented by attorneys have to have a time to kind of understand and digest it. But I think in terms of the practical implications, in terms of not having huge houses on small lots, I think that's an appropriate thing, and I think it's a good thing that's been done.
And one other, considering all the changes in the housing and the affordable housing and needed in, the student situation with using a lot of the housing, would you consider, instead of the every 10 years with the comprehensive plan, would you consider revisions on more of a real-time kind of event where you see some issues coming up and maybe we could put something in the comp plan to combat some of these?
Yeah,
Would you be open to that?
conceptually, yes. What I don't fully know is what the state law requires in terms of the comp plan ultimately has to be adopted, it has to be accepted by the state. And I don't know whether or not the state allows for the town to amend their comp plan and send it in for approval on a, let's say, on a every 6 months or a kind of as needed basis. I don't know of anything that would preclude it. I just don't know I just don't have any answer for that question in terms of what it requires.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll also say one other thing. Revising comp plans are not, I mean, doing a comprehensive revision of the comprehensive plan is not an easy thing to do. It's not necessarily, if it's done well, it requires a lot of consultation with the community on the way through. And if it's done well, it's not necessarily without cost, in addition to staff time.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep.
Councilor Lawler?
Hi, thank you for coming in. Two quick questions. First, like a clarification. You had originally applied for planning and zoning. Did you put on your application at that time a preference to one board or the other?
To be honest with you, I haven't seen my application since I put it in 3 years ago, but my preference would have been planning if I didn't designate it at
Okay.
that point in time.
So this is just an opportunity that the seat has opened up,
Correct.
you can move over?
Correct.
Okay, understood. Thank you. We know, we're talking a lot about zoning tonight, about affordable housing. Looking at planning Narragansett, the same question I had asked Mr. Widener, where do you believe, what do you see as the next changes that you would like to move with the planning board for Narragansett?
Well, I think there are a set of priorities that I would have in mind, is kind of looking at things. Climate resiliency is important for this community, making sure that particularly the critical infrastructure is protected, properly protected, identified and properly protected going forward, because the rest of it relies on it if it's not there. Strong neighborhoods, I have seen in a variety of different places in St. Louis and in stores, neighborhoods that get destabilized as a result of inattentive landlords and inattentive landlords not managing the property and not managing their tenants. That is something that strong neighborhoods, well-organized neighborhoods are able to deal with. Affordable housing is important. I think we're going to, we've talked about it before, we'll talk about it again. I will simply say this, the town needs to think about where it can influence, the equation here. And I'll say, I did just a few notes, I want to refer to them because I figured it would come up tonight. If you think about affordable housing and where the cost is, it's the cost of land and the building. It's the cost of the product itself, what are you building? It's the cost to finance the product going forward. It's the cost of the people who own it going forward. And it's the cost of the permanency of any municipal or state subsidies that are put in play. The town has to figure out which of those things it can influence how, and it can influence some more easily than others. On the issue of target audience, I think the town needs to be clear on what its target audiences are. Workforce housing, teachers, public safety people, commercial fishers, special needs and seniors. There is a role for indigenous people here in Narragansett as well. So there's, if you look at the zoning ordinance as it stands right now, there are zoning ordinances, there's a language in there in terms of local preferences, I think it's in 7A3 if I'm not mistaken. I think that language survives in the ordinance that you'll be looking at tonight, but I think that's probably a pretty good guide of what we do on the affordable housing side. I think you need to grow and continue to, I think Narragansett has a very resilient local business community, and I think that's really quite good. I think where there's opportunities is to grow the assets is in the Bay campus, particularly any research that's being done there and commercializing that research, and on the fishing side of things. I think you got to continue to strengthen schools, make sure they're well attended, and I think the Boone Street corridor has come along quite well. I think there's a need to continue to boost that going forward. So from my vantage point, those are some of the things that I think are priorities for the town going forward. You're welcome.
Councilor Cecilia Barano?
When you go last, most of the questions have been answered. I was curious about the zoning switch to the planning. Deb asked that question, so you gave a pretty clear answer. So I'm really left with very few questions. Maybe you could share some of the skills that you have that would make you a successful board member for the planning board.
Sure. Before I answer that, I'd like to answer the question you raised earlier. Simply because I may not be able to stay for the whole meeting tonight.
What question
That's
is that?
on the inclusionary
zoning. I was going to
zoning.
ask that too, so go ahead.
Inclusionary zoning. I would not be as quick to jettison inclusionary zoning as you might tonight, or whenever final reading of this thing takes place. I'm a big believer in carrots and sticks, and in the absence of a stick, sometimes a carrot is not enough just because you could get a density bonus. There are folks who might choose not to seek a density bonus. And in the absence of seeking a density bonus, as I understand what's written here, you would not be required to provide affordable housing units going forward for lots, for developments less than nine buildings. So it may be that the wisdom of, there's a big enough incentive in terms of the bonus densities to drive this thing. There are a lot of reasons why maybe inclusionary zoning hasn't worked. I have some experience tracking a particular development. It was over the threshold. It was under the threshold. It was 5 units instead of 6. There was an opportunity to kind of influence the product there in terms of, instead of being single-family residential, it could have been clustered if the planning and zoning boards, I think, did a better job negotiating on that thing. So I would be careful about taking any arrows out of my quiver until I see how this thing plays out a little bit. That's kind of what I would say on that.
Thank you.
In terms of background that I bring to this, I have, as I said before, when I was at Aetna, Aetna had a...
So Tom, the question, working with the board, what skills do you bring working with a group of people?
Oh, with a group of
Yeah,
people.
because I know presently you're on the zoning
Yeah.
board. What would be a quick list of positive skills that you bring working with that group?
You gotta listen. You gotta listen. You have to talk to people in language that they're accustomed to. We have 3 attorneys on the board of the zoning board. They have a language, they have familiarity with, particularly those who practice on the planning and the land use side. So you have to have some familiarity with the language and be able to use that language. You got to speak clearly. You've got to be willing to, I'll go to the Wilson Drive issue. You have to be able to work hard and find what's in the comp plan that applies, at least until this point in time, what's in the comp plan that could apply to what's going on. And on Wilson Drive, for example, you have to be able to say, look, the folks who came to Wilson Drive did I think, the best job in the 2 years that I've been there. They had their own experts that were willing to challenge the experts that the applicant had. And as I said before, one of the things I think you need to be able to encourage people who are lay people, who are not necessarily experts, to bring their lay expertise to the table and take that into consideration.
Thanks. And my final question
Sure.
is, the Affordable Housing Group has been working on a mixed-use ordinance town-wide for about 1.5 years, and I was just wondering how you feel about that, or what's your opinion of a mixed-use town-wide?
Townwide, not in a specific zone.
Right.
I
I
don't want to look.
It's a limited option.
Yeah, I'd want to look at that. You know what I'm saying? Where I've seen it most frequently is in specific overlay zones where you could do something on a mixed-use basis. I don't think you want to plop a mixed-use development right in the middle of a strictly residential neighborhood. But having said that, I'm a fan of mixed use. I've spent 10 years making sure that a mixed-use development got done in Storrs, Connecticut, which was a 600 beds, 140,000 square feet of retail commercial space right across the street from the university's main campus. So as a general principle, I'm in favor of it. The specific application in a specific place at a specific time, I think I'd want to have the opportunity to look at that.
Good enough, thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you. Okay, and I'm going to forego my questions. So for the sake of time, we have another candidate we have to interview, but I really appreciate you coming out again, your answers, your thoughtful answers, and thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Okay, so we have our third and final candidate to interview, Mr. Thomas Hines. Good evening. So we're gonna, so the way the format is, we're gonna have you introduce yourself, speak a little about yourself, and then we'll ask questions.
Sure. Well, the first thing I'm going to tell you about myself is that I just came from an orthopedic doctor's visit, and I'm filled with painkillers, and so I'm a little more loopy than I would normally be. Let me just start with what kind of motivated me to apply for this particular position, and maybe at the outset I might say, and maybe I missed the target, but in any event, Narragansett's an adopted home for me. I mean, I have traveled and been for work and pleasure in all 50 states and about 17 foreign countries. And well, my wife and I got to the point where we were thinking about where we would like to retire, having vacationed here a few times. This is what was number one on the list. And so it is, and I have a dual issue with that, and that's because I grew up in a small town very much like Narragansett on the South Shore of Long Island before Long Island became what it is now. And the preservation of the character of villages like that is, to me, a very important thing. And there's a sense of this town that makes me think I went through a time warp and ended up here at some place where it was pretty much like it was when I was growing up about 60 years ago. So that was my motivation. Background, as I listened to my predecessor's speeches here, mine's different. It's varied in a lot of ways. I would approach this particular interest in this job with respect to the policy issues that are associated with it. But I have an undergraduate degree in business. I was working on an MBA at Ohio State at the time when Mr. Nixon decided he was going to offer me a free set of green underwear. Thanks to a sympathetic faculty who was there at the time, I was able to finish my master's, but not the MBA. When I came out of 2 years in the Army, it is an opportunity for you to draw some different perspectives on life. And so I ended up in a doctoral program where I was working in counseling psychology, but I never finished my dissertation, but I did organize the grad students into a union and struck successfully for some improved benefits. When I went, notwithstanding that activity, I went to work for the university system in New York. The first campus I worked on, about halfway through my first contract there, I ended up with a group of other people organizing the faculty and staff of the State University of New York system, 34 colleges and universities into a union. So I was then asked by the university's central administration to jump to the other side of the table and become part of the management structure. And I did that because I knew at the time the union was a neophyte organization and didn't have the juice that it needed to get things done, and I thought that I could probably accomplish some of those things on the management side more successfully than staying where I was. That area has been an area that's consumed me for the totality of my career, in and out, basically. But I've worked negotiating union contracts on behalf of the governor's office in New York. I've negotiated on behalf of the State University of New York. I headed up the labor department in the state of New York, which is, this is just to talk about managerial experience. Labor and training is the way it's referred to here. The labor department in New York was a combination of labor and training, the federal programs, and then the state issues with respect to labor matters. And I was ended up as the chief operating officer of the agency at a time when we were in a difficult situation with respect to federal funding, and was able to manage it down from about 8,500 employees to staff of 5,000 by basically taking advantage of all the evolving aspects of technology that was concurrent at that particular time. The last chunk of my life has been spent as an arbitrator, labor arbitrator, and a mediator and a fact finder in labor disputes. And it was an interesting occupation, if you want to call it an occupation. It's more of a calling. You spend a lot of time trying to be right. If you're not familiar with the process, you have to be right, because unlike the judicial system, there's no court of appeals. So if you as an arbitrator screw up and make a mistake, nobody's going to come along and fix it. So it's a tremendous amount of responsibility, but mostly what I was best at is the ability to have warring parties to come into the room, make their cases in front of me, and then drag the lawyers outside and say, let's settle this, and come up with a resolution that is mutually acceptable, that everybody owns in the final analysis, instead of leaving it to me to just write a decision and say it's going to be this way. And I was known for that, and that was mostly how I practiced the business, only issuing decisions in situations where the parties just could not reach agreement and find a resolution. As a negotiator, I could always see a resolution as I was sitting there, as they were arguing their case. But sometimes I wasn't strong enough to be able to convince them of that, or the politics that were the pressure on either side prohibited them from resolving those cases. So that's it in a nutshell. But when I retired, we came here. After having vacationed here a bunch, my wife and I have been here, bought our first house in 2003. We started coming over here for vacation purposes back in the, probably about 1998 was the first time we were here. And it just struck me, this place. And one little anecdote about interest about why I like to see the character maintained. One of my sons is a first responder par excellence. He is a trainer and runs a lot of training around the state of New York and a fire academy. And he was telling me he met a firefighter from Narragansett who is, for reasons I don't understand, but I guess Narragansett decided he should go to the fire academy in New York. And my son loves this place. And he says something about, oh yeah, where do you live? And he says, where do you live in Narragansett? And the firefighter said, I can't afford to live in Narragansett. And I remember how, when I heard that, I thought, this is not right. This is not right. And so, again, when I listen to the people who precede me here, I think I have a different perspective on what this particular position was about. Now, I looked at it more from a policy perspective point of view than maybe that I'm not as well grounded in the nuts and bolts of the way this particular committee has historically operated.
Thank you. Thank you. That was
I'm getting cotton mouth.
oh, yeah. Okay. So we do have a 7 o'clock meeting. We're going to go around and ask questions of the council members like we did before. So I'm going to start with Councilor Kopik like I did in previously. So the first question.
Hi, Tom, how are you? Obviously a little socky, but it's nice to see you. And I'm just going to limit my question to one, and that is, do you have any familiarity with the current planning board, how it works, and also some of the challenges that we have ahead with regard to changes based on what the General Assembly has done in the last few months?
On the latter part, no. On the former part, most of my experience with this particular board is the fact that I'm a firm believer in the importance of local news coverage, and I subscribe to local newspapers, and I read all the stuff that is in there in terms of the issues, whether it's an analysis in terms of somebody's reporting or whether it's a public notice that's required.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Ferrandi, just the next one.
Hi, Tom. Thanks for coming tonight. I just have one question. We have what's called the bulk zoning ordinance. I've just been my question for all three candidates, where it prevents some of the massing on smaller lots with these large houses. You know, basically kind of keeping it some familiarity of what the older neighborhoods used to look like. So are you familiar with it, and would you support items like that?
Excuse me. I'm familiar with it, but actually not so much from here. is where we used to live in New York. This was an issue, I don't know if anybody here has been fortunate enough to ever been to Lake George in New York, but it's been pristinely preserved. And part of the issue is this limitation on what can happen when somebody goes in. And a lot of people up there would be house rich and money poor, and they'd be bought out by somebody who was going to come in and put in something that was not in character with what the park was all about. The Lake George is part of an Adirondack Park system, and they're all confined to footprints in order to keep people from coming in and expanding and crowding in space. And I have had that, watching that go back and forth for a long time. They have been able to hold the line on that stuff. It's, the successful outcome is the fact that if you go up into that area, you're not going to see anything that is out of character or inappropriate for what that area is all about. But specifically to here, I know of the issue only from what I read in the local papers.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Lawler?
You gave up your last question. We have time limit. I'll give you mine.
It's okay, no. Councilor Cicilline Bennett?
I was just going to ask the affordable housing question. Obviously, we have a committee that deals with it, and I just wanted to know your experience around any issues with affordable housing and what you could offer to the board if you had any.
First of all, I'll go back to my firefighter example. I love this town. I love this town in many, many ways. If we don't find a balance that's appropriate to support families and real people, and I don't mean that folks who live around here aren't real, but you know, the salt of the earth kind of individuals, and you're going to end up in a situation where it is no longer a town in the sense of the people who are here are folks like me, came over to retire. No, I'm not bringing any kids into the school. I look at the stats that go on, because I was on a school board, or the school committee, as you would call them here in New York, and I was looking at the stats year after year about how many kids enroll in kindergarten and how many kids are graduating from the school. And none of this is a path that I think is very good for the town. And I would suggest, I will indicate that it would be a very high priority for me to be actively involved in issues related to affordable housing, because without affordable housing, we're not going to have a community, as Narragansett has been a community over the years. We need to have a variety of individuals with a variety of backgrounds and a variety of economic circumstances living here to make it a viable community.
Amen.
Thank you.
Councilor Lawler? Okay. So thank you very much. That was a really great, a lot of great answers, and hope you feel better. We do have some water if you want to wait. I can run some water down for you.
I have no idea when it's going to happen, but maybe these drugs will wear off before I go home and scare my wife.
I'm a pharmacist, so it'd probably be a little bit. So, okay. All right, so that will bring us to, that concludes our planning board interviews. So just to kind of summarize, the Narragansett Planning Board is responsible for the preparation and extension to the comprehensive plan for the improvement and physical development of the town and for the regulation and approval of platting and subdivision of land within the town. And the planning board consists of 5 members appointed by the council, each serving 5-year terms. And the meetings for the planning board are held on the 3rd Tuesday of the month at 6 p.m. And the meetings are live streamed on YouTube. So we just interviewed the 3 candidates, and we'll be appointing an individual in the near future. So thank you for attending, and thank you to the candidates. All really great choices. So it's going to be a hard decision, but thank you very much and have a good evening.